Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We'll get started in about 1 minute, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Congratulations to all of you on the Wiladat of Imam Ali Ridha alayhi salam. May Allah grant us the tawfiq, inshallah, to perform his ziyarat in the near future. This evening's program will start with the recitation of the Holy Quran by Abbas Ali Fazil, followed by Hadith Kisa by Faisal Pira. And then, inshallah, we'll have our guest speaker, Shaykh Bilal Hussain from New York, who'll be reciting live for us. For most of you, you will probably remember him from the Amals of Ramadan, where we had those pre-recorded videos of Shaykh Bilal. So he will be joining us live tonight. And then inshallah, we'll end with Qasida and then Ziyarat. So with that, Abbas Ali, if you're ready, Bismillah.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. إذا جاء النصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا صدق الله العظيم اللهم صل على محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I start in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. When there comes the help of Allah and the victory, and you see men entering the religion of Allah in companies, then celebrate the praise of your Lord and ask His forgiveness. Surely He is oft returning to mercy. Sadaqallahul Azim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahsan. Thank you, Abbas Ali. MashaAllah. Great job. All right, Faisal, we'll switch over to Hadith Kisa. Give me 1 second. Let me bring it up and we'll get started. All right, go ahead. Bismillah, Faisal.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري أنه قال عن فاطمة الزهراء عليها السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت دخل علي أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أعيذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف فقال يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فعضني به فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فعطيته به وصرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألؤ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه فقلت وعليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جدا السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وصي وخليفتي وصاحب لوائي قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يعلمني ما يعلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا في محبتي هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء فقال الأمين جبرائيل يا ربي ومن تحت الكساء فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة هم فاطمة وأبوها وبألها وبنوها فقال جبرائيل يا ربي أتأذن لي أن أحبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم رجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا فقال علي إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة فقال النبي ثانية يا علي والذين بعثني بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفي جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيهم محموم إلا وفرج الله حما ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجة فقال علي إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعيدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد سورة المباركة الفاتحة
Ahsan, thank you, Faisal. Great job, mashallah. Before I turn it over to our guest speaker, Shaykh Bilal Hussain, just a quick introduction. Shaykh Bilal was born and raised in the States. He started his seminary studies full-time in 2010 in Najaf. Now back in the States, he works with communities in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and our communities in New York, concentrating on youth programming, continuing Islamic education for adults, and interfaith events, and also focused on developing the Islamic lifestyle for Muslim youth in America. Shaykh Bilal serves as also the chairman of the Zahra Trust, a humanitarian relief organization, And alhamdulillah, he's also a co-director of the NJIC3, which is an interfaith cancer care center in New Jersey. So with your ladus of salawat, let's welcome Shaykh Bilal Hussain. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you for the introduction. Alhamdulillah, it's an honor and a pleasure to join the community and to be able to celebrate this wonderful occasion. As we begin, let's begin with a Suratul Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم وقرآنه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. وأسعد الله أيامنا وأيامكم بذكر ولادة إمامنا إمام الضامن الحجة الثامن علي بن موسى الرضا عليه السلام. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Alhamdulillah, it's a great opportunity we have to get together and to discuss and enjoy and appreciate and celebrate the Wiladat of our 8th Imam. Before we get into our discussion on this topic of the Wiladat of the Imam, there's often a question, especially amongst our youth, of why do we have these celebrations? Why do we take the time to make sure that, for example, we are taking the day to celebrate the Wiladat of the Imam or the Shahadat of the Imam and having these conversations in our community? One of the easiest ways to understand why this is an important part, more so than just simply a cultural heritage, but as a religious necessity. And that religious necessity is best explained by looking at the concept of how Allah speaks to us in Surah Ash-Shura, verse number 23, in which, as part of the verse that we recited now, the verse begins with ذَلِكَ الَّذِي يُبَشِّرُ اللَّهُ عِبَادَهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And that is the bounty whereof Allah gives glad tidings to His servants who believe and do righteous deeds. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. And say that I seek no reward do I ask for you except love from my near kin. وَمَنْ يَقْتَرِفْ حَسَنَةً نَزِدْ لَهُ فِيهَا حُسْنًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ شَكُورٌ. And Allah finishes this verse by making the statement, He says, and anyone who earns good, we shall give him an increase of good in respect thereof, and for Allah is oft forgiving, most ready to appreciate. This verse of the Holy Quran, if we were just to focus on the center part of this verse where Allah is saying, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Now, the entire verse itself speaks to the mu'mineen. But here Allah is talking to and giving instruction that, Ya Rasulullah, when people come and ask you, how shall they compensate you for the glad tidings you've given them of Jannah? Say that I don't want any reward or wealth from you. Instead, as compensation for this good deed that I've done for you, have love for my near ones. Allah makes an interesting selection of words to specify what kind of love He means. You see, Arabic is a very robust language, and it has many different interpretations and explanations for different terms and language and lexicon that can be used. I'll give you an example. Sometimes they discuss, for example, that in the Eskimo language, because ice is so important, there are over 20 words to describe ice, because it's something important. Arabic, similarly, where it takes a concept that's important, has many words to describe it. For example, a lion is something that's considered a sign of bravery, is considered a sign of beauty, is considered many great things in the Arabic culture, which is why there are many terms to describe a lion. And you may hear some of them. For example, we hear the name Asad is lion. We hear the name Abbas is related to lion. We hear the name Firzan is related to lion. We hear the name Ghazanfar is related to lion. All of these names of the term lion are there to describe a concept that is believed to be important within the culture of the Arabs. Similarly, Arabic is a culture that loves love. And there are many terms to describe love and someone who is beloved. Even, for example, one that we know colloquially is used, Habibi, Habibti. I'm talking about someone I love, my dear. We call them Habibi, Habibti. Amongst all of these words of love, the one that Allah selects in this ayah is the term of mawadda. And this is the term that, if we understand the crux of this term, we understand why we go out and we ensure that we celebrate the wiladat and the shahadat of every imam. And that's because the term mawadda that Allah uses here is known as a love, or hubb al-majnoon, or a crazy kind of love. A love that drives you crazy. And even today, if you were to open Google, or you were open to a dictionary of, for example, Hans Wehr or another one, you would find that the term mawadda specifically is referring to a crazy kind of love. Now, in famous ulama have given the narration that how do you understand, how should a person have mawadda for the Ahlul Bayt? And the explanation comes is love the Ahlul Bayt like the way a fish loves water. Now, we know that when we take a fish out of water, it dies. But the ulama go further. They say, no, it's even greater than that. If you take a fish out of water, sure, it'll die. But take that fish and cook it, and then eat that fish. Or if you eat sushi, eat it raw. Either way is fine. I'm not going to kind of talk about sushi, but in general. But you eat that fish, however you eat it. They say the love a fish has for water is so great that when you eat that fish, you become thirsty. That the fish loves water so much that it transfers that love of water to you, the person who ate the fish, that you develop that need for water. You become thirsty. They say that's the kind of love that Allah wants you to have for Ahlul Bayt. And the manifestation of that love is through programs like this, where when we see the happiness of the Ahlul Bayt, we drop everything in our schedule and we show love to Ahlul Bayt. And when we see sorrow in the Ahlul Bayt, we drop everything in our schedule and practice the mourning ceremonies of Ahlul Bayt. So yes, a part of what we do can be seen as a cultural tradition, but that cultural tradition is based and grounded in a Quranic injunction that Allah has enjoined upon us. And that's how the Ahlul Bayt explain that our Shia are those who are happy in our happiness and sad in our sadness. So when we want to educate our children about loving Ahlul Bayt, when we want to teach them about the importance that this is significant in our lifestyle, we can go back to the Quran and say that in Surah Shura, when Allah gives us the introduction to love the Ahlul Bayt, He wants that kind of love where you know about them, where when they're happy, you're happy. When they're sad, you're sad. When they go through difficulty, you change your behavior and your character to reflect how you feel about them. That is such an important concept for us to convey to our next generation. It's not just enough you know their names and you know their numbers and you know where they're buried. Your life should reflect their love. The same way that, for example, we have these people who we call sports fans, and then there's sports fanatics. The sports fanatic knows everything about the team, is aware of everything that the team does, knows where they go, what they do, even the preferred foods of the players. We need to be Ahlul Bayt fanatics. Not in a bad sense, not an extremist, but someone who knows and loves and cares about the Ahlul Bayt so much that that love is reflected in our life. And one of the easiest ways that we do that is that when it comes time for their wiladat, we celebrate. The same way when it comes time for their shahadat, we don't forget them. Now, Our eighth Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha, is someone who was born in the year 148 after Hijrah, and his father, we know, is Imam Musa al-Kadhim, and his mother is Bibi Tuktam. And for the Wiladat of Sayyida Ma'asuma, I had a conversation around the name of Tuktam. I won't repeat it for you, but inshallah, if Allah gives us tawfiq, we'll inshallah discuss Bibi Tuktam at another opportunity. The Imam's Wiladat in the year 148, and his death comes in the year 203, so his life is about 55 years. Historians split his life typically into two parts. The first part is the initial 35 years of his life that he spent under the care of his father, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. And the second half of his life that was spent as 20 years where he was Imam al-Waqt. There are some unique attributes about our Imam, which is why even the idea of splitting his life into two parts oversimplifies the concept of knowing about Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. Famously, one of the things that's best known about Imam al-Ridha is the time that he spent in Tus or in Khurasan as the successor to the Khalifa of the time. However, this time that he spent in Tus, that's very famous and well known and spoken about, only is 3 years of his imamat. That only the last 3 years of his life, in the year 200 after Hijrah, is when he is taken to Khurasan. Prior to that, the rest of his life, the rest of his 52 years of life, are spent in the city of Medina. And there's a lot that we learn about from the Imam and a lot that we learn about the history of Islam from the time of this Imam. And that's kind of the crux of the conversation, is to have a bit more ma'rifah and understanding about this Imam of ours. When we look at the life of this Imam and we look at his life of 52 years before the event of Tus, we see a great preparation for his role in Islam. Let me explain what that means. Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam famously had about 35 children, 35 or 36 children, and some even go so far as to say 38 children, of which there were 17 sons and 18 daughters. And the question is, mashallah, with a family that large, how is it that we were able to identify that Imam al-Ridha would be our next Imam? This gives us an insight into how his first 35 years of life were spent and how Imam al-Kadhim prepared the world for the advent of Imam Ridha. Now, one of the important things to remember when we look at historically, we had seen that the Banu Abbas had begun a process of persecuting the Ahlul Bayt to the extent where when Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam passes away, he has to appoint 5 successors, amongst whom one was Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, because the fear in the life of for Imam al-Kadhim's life. Imam al-Kadhim now having 35 children, how is it that we can identify Imam al-Ridha? And here the Imam takes a series of steps to make it clear for us to understand who is the Imam that will come after him and how do we recognize him. Now, there are 4 points that we mention. One is that we see that Imam al-Ridha was appointed by Imam al-Kadhim to sit in Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina and to answer the questions of people and to pass judgment over their issues and problems. This became a very public way in which the Imam was present amongst the people, and they had known that they can rely on him for knowledgeable information and answers to their questions. The second place where Imam al-Kadhim gave distinction to Imam al-Ridha to ensure that it would be known he was the leader after Imam al-Kadhim was amongst the family of Imam al-Kadhim. That Imam al-Kadhim gave the responsibility of the entire family to Imam al-Ridha, so as that all of the siblings knew that when there was an affair that needed to be settled, or even a marriage for the sisters that needed to be appointed, that they needed the permission of Imam al-Ridha. That this way, Imam al-Kadhim in narrations distinguishes the character so that all of the children know and there is no doubt where the imamat will go after Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. The third place is the process of teaching and education. You see, the institution of the teaching of the sciences of Islam was reinitiated in the time of Imam Zainul Abidin and reached its peak in the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, where we say that the impact of Imam Sadiq's teaching meant that even after his shahadat, 900 teachers would sit in Masjid al-Nabawi and say, our teacher Imam as-Sadiq taught us. This institution of education continued even after Imam Sadiq, but because of persecution, the number of students who participated and benefited from the Ahlul Bayt were restricted by fear of what the Khilafat would do to them. However, Imam al-Ridha from a very young age also possessed students, and he would teach them at the same time as his father, Imam al-Kadhim, would teach classes as well too. And when at times Imam al-Kadhim was taken out of the ability to teach through the persecution that he underwent, remember something, that while Imam Ridha spent 35 years under his father, for 14 years of the life of Imam al-Kadhim, he was taken from prison to prison, and limited was his approach and ability to interact with his family and children, and even the students he would teach. So when Imam Kadhim wasn't available to teach, it was Imam al-Ridha who was given the responsibility to teach the classes of even his father. This aspect of being the one who was the teacher for all of the people, whether they were his students or even by saying that Imam al-Kadhim, when he wasn't teaching, Imam Ridha would teach his class, was a clear indication of where the imamat would fall after Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. The fourth characteristic that we take a look and we see gave us the identification of who was the imam after Imam al-Kadhim was this title of Ridha, one whom is pleased. Now, about whom one is pleased. Now, some, for example, mu'arrikhin come to the conclusion and they say that Imam Ridha was given the title, the one with whom people are pleased, because, or he was given this title of Ridha because people were pleased with him. Whether you are his enemy or his friend, people liked him. Another explanation that comes from us in our school of thought is that this title was given to him because he was radhi bil qadri wal qada, that he was pleased with whatever Allah had appointed for him and passed for him. The reason that this first title, that people believe that it was because, oh, the people were pleased with him, even his enemies were pleased with him, there's a few different explanations for this. One explanation points to the fact that when he was appointed as the Na'ib Khalifa, or the successor to the Khalifa, everybody accepted it. Therefore, he was known as the one that everybody is Ridha, pleased with. Another explanation comes that Imam Ridha possessed a unique and special characteristic that no one disliked him. This means to say that, for example, no one would cut off his speech. No one would want to break relations with him. No one would want to be separated from him. And this was a result of the character of Imam Ridha alayhi salam. That the Imam was someone who made sure to keep good relations and avoided conflict at all times. Even if someone would be speaking something that was bad or inappropriate, the Imam would never cut off his speech. He would let him complete his thought. If a person asked a question, the Imam always pleasantly answered their question. The Imam was always someone who made sure that anyone who came in his area or came near him had a good interaction with the Imam. That the Imam was someone who highlighted the aspect of the hujjah of Allah by taking every opportunity to connect people together. It's described in such a way that even the servants in his house, the Imam, if he brought some new fruit that came into season or any special food into the house, he would never eat alone. He would gather even the servants of his house and sit with them to enjoy some food. And he would say to them, there is no difference between you and I. Our colors may be different, our languages, our nationalities may be different, but there is no difference between us except on the basis of piety in the eyes of Allah. Imam Ridha sitting with his servants, they would describe was such a unique, not a unique characteristic because all of the Aimma did, but they said there was something that we saw in him, that we would see that not only would he sit with his servants when new food would come in and invite them to eat, he wouldn't eat the food until all of the servants had eaten it and praised Allah for it, such that there would be no shame or embarrassment in the servants to eat with Imam Ridha. When Imam Ridha was eventually sent to be taken to the land of Tus in his last 3 years of life, Ibn al-Dhahhak was sent on behalf of the Khalifa. And when Ibn al-Dhahhak returned to the Khalifa asked him, how did you find this Ali ibn Musa? How did you find this individual? Ibn al-Dhahhak says, I have found him to be an unusual man indeed. There is no land that we passed, no people that we passed, except that they all loved him. This attribute is one of the reasons why some people thought that, oh, he is Ridha, the one with whom they are pleased, because everyone is pleased with him. That all of the people that interact with him are happy to see him and happy to spend time with him. But truthfully, his greatness is not in the eyes of how people view him and what people think of him. No Imam who has ever come was concerned with how the people would see him. Rather, every Imam was concerned with the way that Allah would see them. And this is why when we look at the title of Ar-Ridha, what makes sense to us and what we understand is that he was known as Ar-Ridha because he was pleased with whatever Allah dictated for him and whatever it was that Allah ordained upon him. Let me give you an example of why we know that this is his title. One of the famous examples is that he was taken from the city of Medina to the farthest away of any Imam. Imam Ridha's grave is the furthest away from his family and is the furthest away from Rasulullah. And that he was willing that Allah put him through this trial where he was separated from all of his family and loved ones. And Imam Ridha bore it patiently and was patient at being separated from his family. Now remember, we just explained, he had 35 brothers and sisters. He was born and raised by the grave of the Holy Prophet. He spent 52 years of his life by the Prophet. And then the Khalifa came and insisted that you come to me in Khurasan. Yet the Imam never complained about it. The Imam was separated from all of his siblings, from the graves of his parents, from all of his relatives, from everybody. But he went. This is one explanation of what shows that he was someone who was Radhi bil Qadri wal Qada, the one who was pleased with what Allah ordained and what Allah passed on him. Another more delicate point that's mentioned is that while it's true that our eighth Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha, was one of 35 or 36 children, he himself had no children until very late in life. There are two sets of narrations. One, there is the popular Sunni historians who say that Imam Ridha had one son, Imam Muhammad al-Jawad alayhi salam, and he had 4 or 5 daughters. And then amongst our historians, the narration comes that Imam Ridha, no, he only had one son, Imam al-Jawad, and no other children, no other issue came from him. In a culture where to have children was seen as a sign of dignity, and that to have children was seen as a sign of both success and fulfillment of life, Allah withheld children from Imam Ridha until he was approximately 48 years of age. And 47 or 48 years of age, at which point in time he only had 3 to 5 years with his son before he was separated from him and taken to the city of Tus. Yet you look at the life of our 8th Imam, and there's no point at which he complains. There is no narration of famous stories that the Imam would, na'uzubillah, weep for children, or that the Imam had special du'as that he was always reciting and looking for children. No. However Allah dictated for his life to be spent, Imam Ridha was pleased with whatever condition Allah kept him in. That even though he was born into a big family and had many siblings and many cousins and many nephews and nieces and large families in every direction, Allah didn't will for him to have children at that time, and the Imam never once complained about it. One of the important lessons we learn from this story, and that's important for us to reflect upon when we look at the life of Imam Ridha, is that sometimes we imagine that if we live a pious lifestyle, if we are, for example, people who worship Allah greatly, then there is nothing that Allah should deny us. then we should have everything we want, because while I worship Allah, I should ask Him and He should give me. Right? Doesn't Allah say, "Ad'uni astajib lakum"? Call on me and I will answer you. But you see, the difference is when we believe that Allah should answer us the way that we want to have Him answer us, and when Allah gives us what He wants to give us. One of the great lessons of the life of Imam Ridha is when we say he was radhi bil qadri wal qada, that he was pleased with whatever Allah ordained for him and passed upon him. It's for us to learn and to understand that when we go through difficulties in life, when we have desires that we want that Allah delays for us or doesn't answer us, that we too should be pleased with what Allah has given us. In this world, there is no one more pious than the Imam, which is why we call him Hujjatullahi alal ard, the authority of Allah on this earth. There is no one else above him in this world that we can go to or that needs to be seek their permission. Yet that Imam was patient through his trials in life and was patient when Allah did not give him. What makes you think that we are better than the Imam, that we should ask and immediately receive what we want? This is also a point to another reality, that it is important to acknowledge that just because a person is pious, it doesn't mean that their prayers are answered immediately. As a matter of fact, there are times when Allah says, "The pious one, I delay the answering of his prayers because of the beauty with which he calls me." Which brings an example to mind of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Famously, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, as Alama Majlisi mentions in his book, Bihar al-Anwar and Ain al-Hayat, was traveling in the land. And he heard someone worshiping Allah in a beautiful voice. And he wanted to know, who is this that's calling Allah with this wonderful voice? When he went, he found a man of great height. And he went close to him and he asked him, "What's your name and where are you from?" And the man answered very simply and didn't think much of it. And Nabi Ibrahim says, "Let's go to your house. I'm a foreigner in this land. Take me to your house so I can stay with you. And I wish to be your guest and to eat dinner with you," because one of the attributes of Nabi Ibrahim was that he never ate alone. He always ate with guests and ate with other people and shared the food that he had. So he says to this man, he says, "Take me to your house, let's go, and we'll share some bread together and we'll sit together." The man says, "I don't know if you can make it to my house." Nabi Ibrahim says, "Why not?" He says, "Because on the way to my house is a river, and you have to cross that river to get there, and there's no boat there." So Nabi Ibrahim says, "How do you get across?" He says, "Allah has given me the ability to walk over that river, so I walk over it." Nabi Ibrahim says, "Let's see, maybe I'll be allowed as well too." And the man says, "Okay, fine, if you want to." They go to the river. Nabi Ibrahim says, "You first." The man literally walks on the water and walks over the side of the river. And now the man watches in Nabi Ibrahim in the same fashion, steps on the water and walks over the river. The man says, "This is interesting." Nabi Ibrahim finds his companion interesting too. When they get to the house, they eat some food together, and Nabi Ibrahim says, "Now let's pray to Allah together." And the man replies, "Why would you want to pray with me?" Nabi Ibrahim says, "Why not?" The man says, "I have been worshipping Allah for many years and asking Him for one hajjah, and He hasn't fulfilled my desire. My prayers are not answered. You don't want to pray with me. Don't pray with me. Let me be." Nabi Ibrahim says, "What is your dua that Allah hasn't answered for you? What have you been asking for that Allah refused you?" The man says, "Some years ago, when I was traveling through the land, I saw a beautiful flock of sheep. And there was a young boy who would praise Allah as he herded these sheep, and I had never seen a better boy and better sheep. So I asked him, 'Who are you and who are these sheep?' And he replied, 'I am a servant of the friend of Allah, and this is his flock.'" The man says, "When I heard that on this earth there exists Khalilullah, there exists a friend of Allah, I became excited. And I began to pray to Allah, 'Oh Allah, if you have a friend on this earth, introduce me to him. Oh Allah, if there is one who is known as Khalilullah, the friend of Allah, let me be his associate.'" Nabi Ibrahim smiles and replies, he says, "Oh man, Allah has sent his friend, his Khalil, into your house. I am Ibrahim Khalilullah. I am the one whose flock you saw and who you were making dua for. Come, let us make dua to Allah together. This story, one of the important themes behind the story was learning the importance of that you ask Allah and ask Him continuously. And don't be embarrassed that if He delays the answering of your dua. Allah says to His angels, He says, those who call me and I love their call, I delay their answer so they keep calling me and coming back to me. And on the other side, He says to His angels, He says, but there are some of those whose voice I hate to hear, that when they call me, I answer their need immediately. Now, that doesn't mean that, for example, someone whose dua is answered quickly is someone who Allah hates. Let's not make that assumption. Let's not jump there. But let's focus on the important part, that sometimes when our prayers are answered, it's because of the proximity we attain to Allah that Allah delays it. The same way giving of children to Imam Ridha was something that Allah delayed. Now, this Imam has some fantastic characteristics and some unique specialities that are associated with him and with no one else. Let me explain. The narrations teach us that the introduction to the ziyarat of Imam Ridha was done by none other than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That 140 years, or approximately 138 years before Imam Ridha was born, our Holy Prophet gave the introduction to Imam Ridha. And he says, Bad'atum minni, that a piece of me will be buried in the land of Khurasan. That a piece of me, Rasulullah is explaining that one of my pieces, a piece of me will be buried in the land of Khurasan. And then he continues, he says, وَمَنْ زَارَهُ دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ, and one who visits him will enter into heaven. Now, if the Holy Prophet had stopped here, we would say that yes, the ziyarat of Imam Ridha is special, but there are many people who will enter into heaven, but first they will have to serve some punishment in hell. That the entrance into heaven, وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ, doesn't necessarily mean that the person will be forbidden from the fire of hell. It could be that, for example, they commit some sins in life and they have to pay for those sins. That they did some mistakes and they have to pay for those sins. Now remember something. Some people, and na'uzubillah, they make this statement too, which is a very bad statement. They say, I'm going to go to hell anyway. Never, ever, ever make that statement. Hell is not a place where anybody wants to be, even for a fraction of a second. Let me explain why. Time and the passage of time, the relativity of time as it's described, is different in dunya and is different in akhirah. To where Allah, even when He describes the day of judgment, He says that one day of the day of judgment will be equivalent to 50,000 years of this life in this dunya. And if that's the day of judgment, the akhirah that is established after that, one of the understandings that we have is that the day in akhirah will be equivalent to the day of judgment. That one day of akhirah will be equivalent to 50,000 years of this world. Other narrations or discussions and explanations and hypotheses that we have of the akhirah that we don't understand is that one day will be the equivalent of, for example, at times 5,000 or 10,000 years of this world. But essentially, that one day in the hereafter is thousands of years of this life in this dunya. Which is why Rasulullah, he even explained it. He says, after my coming, Rasulullah says, after my coming, the day of judgment is like the blink of an eye away. That the time frame until the day of judgment will be very short now. A blink of an eye. So imagine if we compared that with the akhirah, what this time period would be like, where we've spent 1400 years after Rasulullah, and this is still part of the blink of an eye. Imagine then what one day in the hereafter is like. And if you can imagine what one day in the hereafter is like, then imagine what 1 minute in the fire of hell would be like. Which is why we never want to go to hell. Always make sure you seek istighfar of Allah, because even 1 minute of that hell would be too extreme. Anyway, back to our topic. Where Rasulullah makes the introduction, he says, a piece of me will be in the land of Khurasan, and one who does his ziyarah, wajiba alayhi al-jannah. that heaven will become mandatory upon him. But the Rasulullah doesn't stop here. He says, وَحَرَمَ عَلَيْهِ النَّارَ الْجَهَنَّمِ, that the fire of hell will become haram for him. That Rasulullah is explaining the superiority of the ziyarat of Imam Ridha alayhi salam by saying that if you go to his ziyarah, not only will heaven become mandatory for you, but rather that even the fire of hell will become haram for you, that it won't be able to affect you. And this isn't the only riwayah that explains to us about the status of Imam Ridha. There are narrations from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, who in his time prepared the people that his son Ali, he says, the one who will have my name and will be buried in the land of Khurasan, those who go to his ziyarah and attach themselves to him, on the day of judgment, they will be on thrones of light alongside us. How can I explain what that means? Imagine that, for example, you go into the doctor's office and you're in the waiting room. And you're sick, you have a problem and you need the assistance of the doctor, but you see that the waiting room is packed. And you entering when all of these people are here already, the understanding is that you won't get to see the doctor until all of these people have gone before you. Now imagine in this circumstance, as you're in this packed waiting room, the door opens and they come to take you with honors first before everybody else. This is the example Imam Ali is giving, that he says, when you are on those thrones of light with us, then you will be treated in advance of the rest of the nations because of this relation and because of this ziyarat of my son Ali ibn Musa Ridha. Now, this doesn't mean that we're saying that the ziyarat of Imam Ridha is a'zam, greater than the ziyarat of Imam al-Hussain. The same way, the special characteristics of the ziyarat of Imam Hussain doesn't mean that he is greater than Rasulullah. No. Rather, these are unique attributes that Allah has given to each of these people, and that their unique special characteristics are to give them a unique identity amongst one another, but that all of them are sources of light that originate from the tree of Rasulullah, and all of their honor is associated and given us from Rasulullah. If we had the opportunity, we would talk even more and further about these great fada'il and characteristics that each of these imams possess and how we can understand and differentiate them. But with the shortage of time, there's one final point that I want to make about why possibly that this imam ziyarat is so special. You see, when we talk about how the imam was uniquely identified by Imam al-Kadhim, so that the people would know where the imamat goes. And his imamat was so well known that the Khalifa was able to identify that this is the imam of the time and make him the naib of the Khalifa, was so that the affair of imamat would be well known amongst the people and they would know where does the imamat go after Imam al-Kadhim. To the extent where even, for example, the separations that began in Islam after the Shahadat of Imam al-Kadhim, like the Waqifiyya, like the Fatahiyya, and the continuation of the Ismailiyya and the Zaydiyya that happened at all of these times, Imam Ridha worked to end these dissensions and separations and established that he was the one who was the next Imam publicly and openly. To the extent where his being well known in public, because Imam Ridha became well known in public because of being the successor to the Khalifa, that every Imam after him was identified as Ibn al-Ridha, as the son of Imam al-Ridha. That no matter who the people in what land of Islam were, they recognized all of the Imams as being known as Ibn al-Ridha, that the son of Imam Ridha. All of this points to the great significance that Imam Ridha possesses a unique attribute. The basis of this unique attribute is maybe one of the reasons why that he has this unique distinction that if you do his ziyarat, you are guaranteed heaven and protected from the fire of hell. And that you are guaranteed to be the companion of Ahlul Bayt in the entry into heaven on top of that. And this unique attribute that I'm talking about is that anyone who recognizes the imamat of Imam al-Ridha, There is no split amongst the Shia from Imam al-Ridha until Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That one who makes it to believing in the wilayat of Imam Ridha will continue that wilayah until they reach the Imam of our time. So one of the attributes of Imam Ridha is that all of those who are his Shia and believe in his imamat eventually always come to the conclusion of believing in all 12 of the imams and become known as Ithna Ashari, as the 12er Shia. And this is a unique and special attribute, such that we even see, and this gives us the explanation of a narration we see from his son, Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Jawad alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, who asks Imam al-Jawad the question. He says, whose ziyarat is greater, the ziyarat of your grandfather, Imam al-Hussain, or the ziyarat of your father, Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam? And Imam al-Jawad says, the ziyarat of my father is greater. And he says, because to the ziyarat of Imam al-Hussain, many people go. But to my father's ziyarat, only the select few go and attend his ziyarat. Now, this can have two meanings. One, it can mean that in that time of Imam al-Jawad, that the ziyarat of Imam al-Hussain was open, but the ziyarat of Imam al-Ridha was closed and difficult and forbidden to go to, or far away to go to. So the Imam is explaining whosever ziyarat has greater striving and difficulty in, that only those people who really love Ahlul Bayt will go to that ziyarat that is difficult to attend. Or the other interpretation is that the superiority of the ziyarat of Imam al-Ridha is not so much so in anything other than the fact that one who goes to the ziyarat of Imam Ridha knows to go to the ziyarat of Imam Hussain and to go to the ziyarat of Imam Ridha alayhi salam. And that person will be someone who does tawassul by all of the Aimma alayhimus salam, all 12 of the authorities of Allah on this earth. Therefore, one of the greatest du'as that we can make in this night, and the greatest du'as that we can have, is, oh Allah, keep us on the firm footing of the path of Ali Muhammad. Let's take a moment now to make dua by the barakat of this day. نَدْعُوكَ بِاسْمِكَ الْعَظِيمِ الْأَعْظَمِ الْأَعَزِّ الْعَجَلِّ الْأَكْرَمِ يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered before you on this night by the barakat of Imam al-Ridha. Ya Allah, fulfill our hajat by the mention of Imam al-Ridha. Ya Allah, there are those amongst our family, our community, and the mu'mineen around the world who are sick. Ya Allah, by the mention of Gharib Khurasan, Gharib Tus, Ya Allah, give shafa'ah to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, we ask you by the right of this day that, oh Allah, keep our children and our families on the upright path of Ali Muhammad. Those who are in difficulty, remove their difficulties. Those amongst the mu'mineen who are suffering through insecurity and danger, Ya Allah, give aman to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Asri wal Zaman. Make us from the upright supporters of Sahibul Zaman. And Ya Allah, entitle us to the shafa' of Imam al-Hussain in dunya and in akhirah. In this mutabarak moment, let's take a moment to recite one surah Fatiha, 3 times surah Ikhlas, لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Ahsan. Thank you so much, Shaykh Bilal. It was wonderful to hear you with the eloquent lecture on Imam Ridha alayhi salam. May Allah, through His infinite grace, bless you and your family and elevate your knowledge, inshallah. And hopefully we can have you again in the future. Hopefully maybe you Zoom once again, and then inshallah, hopefully in person in California.
It'd be an honor and a pleasure.
Ahsan, thank you so much, Shaykh. Jamil, Bismillah.
أفضل السلام والسلام عليك يا رسول الله محمد وآل محمد صلوات صلوا على محمد يا إمام رضا 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 ہر نفس ہر گھڑی میرے دل سے یہی آ رہی ہے صدا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا تیری عظمت پہ بھلا کیوں نہ دلالت بنتا شیر قالین کا کس طرح نہ زندہ ہوتا ہے حقیقت یہی تیری مرضی میں ہی ہے خدا کی رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا غیر ممکن کو یوں ہوتے ہوئے دیکھا ممکن جاگتی آنکھوں سے جنت میں گزارے کے دن اس کو کیا ہو یقین جس نے دیکھا نہیں کبھی روزہ تیرا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا ربط کے سائے میرے ذہن میں آیا ہے ابھی جیسے گہوار نے فطرس کو شفا بانٹی تھی ویسے ہی روز و شب بانٹتا ہے شفا تیرا سہنا شفا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا اب کے مشہد سے جو پلٹا ہوں تو میرے محسن سانس لینا مجھے اچھا نہیں لگتا لیکن پھر بھی ہے یہ سکون میں کہیں بھی رہوں دل وہی ہے میرا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا کیسے سمجھے گا زمانہ تیرے نوکر کی حدیں تیرے معروف نے باندھی ہے سمندر کی حدیں بڑھتے طوفان کا رخ بدلتا گیا اس نے جب دی صدا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا میری اس وقت تیرے در پہ نظر ہے مولا اور تجھے میری مصیبت کی خبر ہے مولا دور افتاد کر میری امداد کر تو ہے مشکل خوشا یا امام رضا یا امام رضا या इमाम रजा जीते जी जान से अपनी मैं गुजर जाऊंगा जल्द मशहद न बुलाओगे तो मर जाऊंगा ए इमाम गरीब तुम हो मेरे तबीब जल्द कर दो दवा या इमाम रजा 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 मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahsan, thank you, Jamil. Mu'minin, before we conclude with ziyarat, let's recite Surah Fatiha for those marhums who are no longer with us here in our families, in our communities, and around the world. Surah Al-Mubarak al-Fatiha. Let's also recite 5 times Amin Yujibu for those that are sick in our community, in our families, and around the world. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifus su. 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Miqdad, are you ready for ziyarat? Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulullah. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Fatima al-Zahra. Assalamu alayka ya Hassan al-Mujtaba. Assalamu alayka ya Hussain al-Shaykh. Assalamu alayka ya Ali Zain al-Abidin. Assalamu alayka ya Muhammad al-Baqir. Assalamu alayka ya Jafar al-Sadiq. Assalamu alayka ya Musa al-Kadhim. Assalamu alayka ya Ali al-Ridha. Assalamu alayka ya Muhammad al-Taqi. Assalamu alayka ya Ali al-Naqi. Assalamu alayka ya Hassan al-Askari wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alayka ya Sahib al-Asri wa zaman. Al-Aman, Al-Aman, Al-Aman. Assalamu alayka ya Khalifat al-Rahman. Assalamu alayka ya Sharik al-Quran. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli
ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma kulika hujjatana hasan salawatika alayhi wa ala abai fi hadhihi sa wa fi kulli sa waliyanu hasiran wa qaidanu nasran wa zuwina hatta tashkil wakatuhu tatiu fiha tuya anitya ar-Rahim.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Great job, mashallah, Zain Ali. All right, Mu'mineen, that concludes our program for this evening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hafiz.
Hafiz.